It was a Wednesday night in Georgia. Theresa had just visited her sister, full of excitement about her new apartment and the fresh start she'd been waiting for. Everything felt like it was finally falling into place. Around 10:30 p.m., she made one last call to a friend. Theresa said she was heading back to the house she still shared with her soon-to-be ex-husband, just to pick up a few more things. She planned to wait until he was asleep to avoid any trouble. But after that, no one ever heard from her again. Her phone went quiet, her car showed up in a strange place, and the man she was trying to get away from? He had a story, but something about it just didn't feel right. What really happened that night would take years to uncover, and the truth was far more disturbing than anyone imagined. This is the story of Theresa Parker. Theresa Fielding was born on September 9, 1965, in San Diego County, California. The daughter of Claire and William Fielding, she grew up in a bustling household alongside her four siblings, Hilda, Jerry, Richard, and the youngest, Christina. From the earliest years, Theresa shared a uniquely close bond with Christina, a connection that remained unwavering throughout her life. But her loyalty wasn't limited to just one sibling. Family, in every form, was always at the core of who she was. As an adult, Theresa was known for her warmth and easygoing nature. Her kindness left a lasting impression, and that empathy guided her into public service. She found work as a police dispatcher in Lafayette, Louisiana, where she thrived in the fast-paced environment. Conveniently, Christina and her family had also moved to the area, allowing the sisters to stay in constant touch, something they both cherished deeply. Theresa's talent and dedication eventually led her to a new role. In September 1992, she was appointed supervisor of the Emergency Services Center in Walker County, Georgia. It may have been around this time that her life intersected with that of Samuel Logan Parker, a local police officer born around 1956 and raised in Walker County. Samuel grew up exploring the woods and fishing with his brother Kenneth, who would later follow him into both the military and law enforcement. To those close to him, Samuel's identity was inseparable from his badge. He was a man who lived for the job and rarely allowed anything else to interfere. But behind his professional image, a darker side lingered. In the 1980s, Samuel married a woman named 𝐬𝐭. By 1989, during his second stint with the Lafayette Police Department, 𝐬𝐭 confided in friends that her husband had physically assaulted her while in uniform. One of those friends happened to be married to City Councilman Max Morrison, who brought the disturbing allegations to Police Chief Dino Richardson and City Manager David Aldridge. Nothing came of it. Samuel was never questioned. The violence continued. 𝐬𝐭 endured another terrifying incident when she confronted Samuel about a simple interaction he'd had with a store clerk. His reaction was explosive. He dragged her by the hair through broken glass and handcuffed her to a bedpost. Eventually, 𝐬𝐭 found the strength to leave him. But even after separating, Samuel's aggression escalated. He broke into her new home using a master key, pinned her down on a couch, and pressed his service revolver to her head. He threatened her life and swore no one would ever find her body if she told anyone what had happened. Despite this chilling history, Samuel eventually began courting Theresa, who by all accounts had no idea about his violent past. His charm won her over quickly. He told Kenneth she was smitten, and Christina thought he was humorous and gentlemanly. He seemed like the perfect match. On September 11th, 1993, Samuel and Theresa were married. Their early years as a couple were passionate but volatile. They loved deeply but often clashed. Over time, the darker sides of Samuel's personality began to resurface. Professionally, he had risen through the ranks and was at the peak of his career by 2002. Privately, though, their home had become a battleground. On May 4th of that year, emergency responders were called to the couple's home in response to a domestic disturbance. Samuel, drunk and enraged, was shouting at Theresa, accusing her of infidelity. When police arrived, they found the scene in disarray. Women's clothes and personal belongings scattered across the yard, Theresa in tears, and a visible red mark on her face. When asked about the injury, Theresa claimed she had scratched herself. She declined to press charges and instead asked to stay somewhere else for the night. Under Georgia's Code 17, specifically the predominant aggressor statute, law enforcement officers are required to arrest a suspect in clear cases of domestic violence, even if the victim does not cooperate. Samuel should have been taken into custody, but the police officer in charge didn't act. His silence allowed Samuel to continue living without consequences. This police officer would later justify his inaction that night in 2002 by claiming he didn't want to make Theresa a victim. His decision not to report the incident or arrest Samuel had no official consequence. No record, no follow-up, nothing. The matter simply vanished. By April 2003, Theresa and Samuel tried to patch things up with a vacation. They headed to Panama City Beach, Florida, a resort town lined with over 30 miles of white sand and turquoise water. It should have been a peaceful escape. They spent the day sunbathing and relaxing, eventually settling down for dinner at a beachfront restaurant. But somewhere during the meal, something set Samuel off. His mood turned violent. He threatened to handcuff Theresa, kill himself, and force her to drag his corpse, possibly even hinted he'd take her life as well. The nightmare escalated as they drove away from the restaurant. Samuel fired his revolver out of the car window. Witnesses immediately called the police. When officers arrived, they found Theresa crying and shaken. Samuel, heavily intoxicated, was erratic and combative. Though he admitted to threatening suicide, he denied firing a gun or even having one. But his lie collapsed quickly. Police recovered 2 firearms from his vehicle, one of which had been recently discharged. Due to the nature of the threat and his behavior, Samuel was transported to a mental health facility for evaluation. He went unwillingly. On the way, he told officers something chilling, that with his law enforcement experience, he could hide a body so well no one would ever find it. After 72 hours under observation, he was released and returned home with Theresa. Time did not heal the damage. Samuel's mental state unraveled further, worsened by constant alcohol abuse. He no longer confined his drinking to after hours. It consumed his workdays too. Their home life, already fragile, disintegrated completely. In April 2006, Theresa reached out to 2 of Samuel's colleagues, Dino and Sheriff Steve Wilson, for help. She met with them for 45 minutes and detailed Samuel's erratic behavior, his alcoholism, the Florida incident, and ongoing threats. She made it clear. She didn't want him arrested. She just wanted him out of the house. Soon after, Theresa took the first major step toward freedom. She filed for divorce. Her sister Christina stood by her side, watching as Theresa, instead of despair, radiated relief. it was the right decision. By early 2007, Theresa was planning a fresh start. She searched for a new apartment, hoping to live close to Christina and spend more time with her nephews. Though she still lived under the same roof as Samuel, finding a new home gave her a surge of hope. On March 21, 2007, Theresa found the place she wanted. Moving in energized her. That night, she visited Christina, and they talked excitedly about the new apartment and future plans. But as they hugged goodbye, Christina sensed something strange, an emptiness she couldn't explain. At about 10:30 p.m. from her new apartment, Theresa called her close friend and colleague Rhonda Knox. She said she planned to return briefly to the marital home in Lafayette to pick up some belongings. She would wait until Samuel was asleep, anything to avoid a confrontation. That night, Theresa Parker vanished. At around 2 a.m. on March 22nd, Samuel showed up at the home of Christy Bellflower, a woman he was reportedly seeing. Using her phone, he called fellow officer Ben Chaffin. What he told Ben was horrifying. He had done something to Theresa and claimed no one would ever find her. Before ending the call, he warned Ben to stay quiet or face consequences. At 5 a.m., Samuel left the residence. Investigators believe that sometime during those early hours, he disposed of Theresa's body. They suspect he went to a remote area about 30 miles from Walker County, near a river and hunting trail, a place he knew well from childhood. At 6 a.m., Rhonda Knox received a call from Theresa's phone. No one spoke. The line went dead. Repeated attempts to reach her, by cell and landline, failed. Alarmed, Rhonda contacted Shane Green, a friend in the Walker County Sheriff's Department, and asked him to check on Theresa. Shane and fellow deputy Corey Griffin arrived at the house in Lafayette and searched the perimeter. Samuel's gray truck was parked outside. Though the garage was locked, Shane used his flashlight to peer through a crack. Inside was Samuel's patrol car, but Theresa's vehicle was missing. Christina, unaware of what had happened, assumed her sister was simply busy cleaning her new apartment. But by the afternoon, the situation changed. Theresa's SUV was suddenly back at the house she had shared with Samuel, yet she was nowhere to be seen. Her phone went unanswered. No one had seen her. Even Samuel was calling her. By then, it had been over 24 hours without contact. Christina was frantic. On Saturday, March 24th, the Parker family filed a missing person report. Friends, neighbors, and community members quickly mobilized. They held vigils, posted flyers, and began searching, hoping for a lead. Recognizing the case's sensitivity, Sheriff Steve Wilson brought in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent James Harris was assigned. He began at Theresa's new apartment, where he found some clothes, shoes, and her work uniform, but no sign of Theresa herself. The community rallied. Search teams combed through woods, drained ponds, and sifted through the local landfill. Yet the landscape was vast. Dense forests stretched endlessly around the couple's former home. As suspicions mounted, Special Agent Harris interviewed Samuel. The officer claimed Theresa had left on her own because of their divorce, but inconsistencies in his timeline raised red flags. Something didn't add up. The Parker home was searched 5 times. Investigators confiscated old rifles and weapons, though none seemed directly tied to the disappearance. Samuel lashed out at police, accusing them of unfairly targeting him and suggesting they inspect Theresa's belongings instead. To strengthen their case, investigators used scent-tracking dogs. They introduced the dogs to Samuel's scent from his clothing and patrol car. Released, the dogs followed a trail up a hill, then back down, a pattern that aligned with the theory he had taken a body into the woods. Still, Samuel maintained his story. she had simply left. He accused law enforcement of inventing a narrative with no proof. But the biggest omission came from the officer who had received Samuel's confession. He never told anyone about the call. As months passed and leads dried up, the investigation widened, but the evidence, bit by bit, kept circling back to Samuel. Authorities conducted yet another search of the former marital home. This time, a crime scene technician discovered what appeared to be traces of blood. The case was no longer just a disappearance. As forensic experts continued their work, a disturbing detail emerged. Samuel's vehicle had clearly been cleaned. The interior had been wiped down, scrubbed of any visible traces. But the evidence, quietly building over months, was about to reach a breaking point. After 25 years in law enforcement, Samuel Parker was fired from the Lafayette Police Department, not for misconduct on the streets, but for keeping explosives in his locker at work. The dismissal confirmed what many had long suspected. Samuel was spiraling far beyond the bounds of control. He no longer respected the badge he once worshipped or the institution that had shielded him. Then came the discovery that changed everything. Forensic analysis confirmed that Theresa's blood and Samuel's DNA were found in the back of his truck. With that, on February 4, 2008, Samuel was arrested and formally charged with his wife's murder. He clung to his story that Theresa had gone to Florida or maybe crossed the border, but there was no body, no final proof. Still, the case went to trial. On August 17, 2009, the trial began. He never testified in his own defense. Instead, his legal team argued that Theresa might still be alive. Samuel's first wife took the stand and testified about the horrors she endured. Then, in a moment that shocked everyone in the courtroom, Officer Ben Chaffin finally admitted what he had kept hidden: the early morning phone call from Samuel, where he confessed to killing Theresa and boasted that no one would ever find her body. Witness after witness recalled how Samuel had often bragged about knowing the Georgia woods like the back of his hand, well enough to hide a body that would never be discovered. Using this and a web of circumstantial evidence, the prosecution built a detailed timeline, reconstructing how Samuel may have ended Theresa's life and disposed of her remains. The defense pushed back, arguing there was no direct evidence linking him to her death: no body, no weapon, no witness to the act. But in September 2009, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty of malice murder, making false statements, and violating his oath as a public official. The judge sentenced Samuel Parker to life in prison without parole. He showed no emotion. Across the aisle, Theresa's family wept. Christina, though grateful for the conviction, couldn't escape a painful truth. Samuel, the man now condemned to spend the rest of his life behind bars, was likely the only one who knew where her sister's body lay. And he refused to talk. Samuel's attorneys filed an appeal, arguing that the evidence was insufficient and the trial flawed. They demanded a new trial. But fate had other plans. 3 years after Theresa disappeared, on the afternoon of Monday, September 20, 2010, a man named David was taking a break from a long day hauling corn. While walking along a wooded stretch near the eastern bank of the Chattooga River, close to the Alabama border, he stumbled upon something unusual. It was a human jawbone. David immediately alerted authorities. That evening, more skeletal remains were discovered in the same area. As darkness fell, the search was paused. The next day, with a larger team, investigators returned to the scene. Additional bones and pieces of clothing were recovered nearby. Ironically, at the very same time, a separate search effort for Theresa's body was underway, but it was taking place in an entirely different area, far from the state line. Once the remains were secured, forensic experts began their work. Comparing dental records, they made the heartbreaking confirmation. It was Theresa. And even now, he has never spoken of what happened that night. Though investigators had recovered Theresa Parker's remains, one critical mystery remained unsolved. How exactly her body ended up in that remote area? It could have been the site where Samuel originally left her, or the current pushed her remains there over time. No one could say for sure. After 3.5 years exposed to the elements, forensic experts were unable to determine the exact cause of death. But there was no doubt anymore. Theresa had been found. On the night of Tuesday, September 21st, 2010, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Walker County Sheriff's Office began notifying all agencies involved in the case. Most importantly, they contacted Theresa's family. After years of agony and endless searching, the Parker family finally had some form of closure. That Wednesday, just past noon, Sheriff Steve Wilson called a press conference. Between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m., local reporters gathered outside the Walker County Courthouse, cameras ready for the announcement, time for the evening news. The conference took place in the public affairs room in the basement of the commissioner's office. "It's a difficult day to report," Sheriff Wilson began, "but it's a day that brings some peace to the family, to her loved ones, to her co-workers, and to the hundreds who worked tirelessly on this case for over 3 years." After his remarks, which lasted about 15 minutes, Wilson took questions from the press. He reaffirmed that his department had never stopped searching for Theresa. Now, with her remains recovered, the jury's verdict felt fully justified. The officials expressed deep sympathy to the Parker family, acknowledging that while nothing could undo their loss, at least they could now lay her to rest. Even among those who had once defended Samuel, doubts had now been silenced. The recovery of Theresa's remains shifted the tide, eroding any remaining faith in the former officer's innocence. Still, criticism lingered over how long it took to locate her body. Many pointed out that law enforcement had focused their searches within a 4-county radius, but had never ventured to the southern edge of Chattooga County. It was only thanks to a farmer's accidental discovery that the truth was finally uncovered. A few days later, the police released a medical examiner's report. It confirmed what everyone already suspected. Theresa had been the victim of homicide. However, the report could not identify a specific cause of death. Despite the uncertainty surrounding the method, investigators agreed on one point. None of this new information supported Samuel's appeal. As Sheriff Wilson made clear, the verdict stood firm. On Thursday, October 7, 2010, loved ones gathered at the Walker County Civic Center for a memorial service in Theresa's honor. Friends, family, and community members came to pay their final respects. The next day, a funeral was held at the First Baptist Church of Lafayette. The burial took place on Saturday, October 9th. Sheriff Wilson attended in person. By that time, Samuel Parker had been serving a life sentence for 14 months in a Georgia state prison. In a rare move, he granted an exclusive interview to a local news outlet. With no remorse, he continued to proclaim his innocence, criticized the prosecutors, and accused them of distorting his character. He claimed the evidence was manipulated and that he had been falsely portrayed as violent and unstable, but the courts did not waver. In November 2014, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld his conviction. Justice had prevailed. For the Parker family, Theresa's absence would always be deeply felt. She had been a central part of their lives, a loving sister, daughter, and friend. They knew that no conviction, no sentence, could bring her back. But knowing that the man who had taken her life would never harm another woman brought them a measure of relief. In her memory, the family made a solemn vow to raise awareness about domestic violence, to speak out, to educate, and to ensure that others recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Theresa Parker's story became more than a tragedy. It became a call to action.
Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.